Welcome back to another Shower Doctor live stream. Today we're going to talk about how an electric shower works. So we'll go through the water and the electricity. If you like this kind of thing that we're doing, you can subscribe to our channel and you could even share it with friends. So what we'll do is we'll discuss the way this works, the way an electric shower works. They're all pretty much the same. Some are much more complicated than others, but we'll just run through the way the whole thing the way the water processes through the unit and also the way that the electricity works. So here we go. First of all, we'll have a look at how the water comes into an electric shower. But perhaps before we do that, we've really got to think about the water pressure and where the water's coming from. 0.8 bar. Well, they may suggest that, but the truth of the matter is if you want it to work properly, you really need 1 bar pressure. If you've not got that kind of pressure, there is one other way around it. Some electric showers actually have a small pump inside, so you can connect it to the tank in the attic. You cannot connect that to the water mains, but if you connect it to the tank in the attic, you've got low pressure with a pump actually inside the shower unit, and that will work perfectly well off low pressure. But as I said, you cannot connect one of these to the mains. But normally electric shower is connected to the mains. So this is a Triton, and this is a Triton T80, and what we're going to do is we're going to just run through the way the water kind of goes through this. So this is the cover come off, and as I said, most showers have all of these things that are basically inside the shower, laid out slightly differently, and perhaps look a little different, but they are in fact all the same. And with an electric shower, basically you kind of get what you pay for. The more money you pay, the better quality these components are that are inside the shower. So let's just assume that this is connected to the mains and we've got 1 bar water pressure coming in here in the inlet. The first thing the water meets is the solenoid. Now, solenoid is basically just an on-off valve. I should say, when we're talking about the solenoid, we actually have individual videos in most of the main components of the shower that are sort of separate ones, and how to check and test them and how they actually work. So I'm not going into too much detail about how they work or fault finding them. I'm really just explaining how the shower itself works. So the water comes in and meets the solenoid valve. When you switch the shower on, the solenoid activates and allows the water into the shower. So the water then passes through the solenoid and then usually into the flow control valve or the stabilizer valve. Some of the really cheap showers don't have a solenoid. All they have is a valve, and it's not much more sophisticated than a tap. And so it then becomes quite difficult to regulate the flow. But the better showers have a flow regulating valve or a stabilizer valve, and the more you pay, the better the quality of the valve. Some of them actually have springs and that kind of thing inside to try and even out the pressure. So for example, if someone should flush the toilet and the pressure drops, the valve will try and compensate for that. It's not great, but it will do its best to compensate. And then immediately above the flow valve or the stabilizer valve, it's connected to a pressure switch, so that the shower will then know that there's actually water pressure coming into the shower, and will switch the electricity on and allow the thing to heat up. We'll discuss that later. So as the water passes through the flow valve, it then comes into the bottom of the heating tank. Once again, the slightly more sophisticated one, sophisticated units have a sort of a thing that swirls the water around. So the water swirls its way around and comes up to the top of the tank, having passed over the heating element. Just a moment. This is the kind of thing that's inside, is like an old-fashioned kettle element. So that is the heating element that's inside some of the showers. They're all different, but once again, as I said earlier, more or less the same. So the water passes over the heating element, and right at the very top of the tank there's the outlet pipe, and the water, as it heats up and rises, it comes in and down the pipe and out through the outlet. And this outlet pipe is then connected obviously to the hose, and the hose to the head. The one thing to mention about all of these, that if the head is blocked or the hose gets kinked, every shower has a pressure relief valve of some type. This one is in fact on the back, here, I've actually got one here that's a little bit easier to see. And so this is the pressure relief valve here. And what happens is if there's too much pressure builds up in the tank, there's a little ball in here that gets blown out. Some showers use a ball, some showers use a little cap, but effectively something gets blown out. If you find that ball, you can push it back in, but this is only really a temporary measure. Once they've come out once, they will keep coming out. What causes it to come out is the head being blocked or the hose being kinked. Just pop this back down. One of the things to watch for, well, is if you go to B&Q to buy, for example, a new shower head, they will often say that it's compatible with an electric shower. You need to be careful of that because it is compatible, but if you buy a shower from the manufacturer, when you change the position of the head, if you've got different modes on the head, that when you change from one to the other, the water never actually shuts off. But when you buy one of these ones from B&Q, not just B&Q, but any of the sheds, that what it does is when you change from one spray pattern to the next, the water momentarily shuts off, and that can be enough to blow the ball out the pressure relief valve. Manufacturers' ones, as you change from one mode to the other, there's always water passing through it, so you won't get that effect. The ones from the shed B&Q are technically correct, but what you really need to do is if you change mode, you really need to switch the shower off, change the mode and switch the shower back on again, which really is not very practical. So that is fairly quickly how the water passes through the shower and kind of what you need to have to make sure that it all works. Just seeing if there's any questions come in. Yeah, there's no live chat questions yet. What I'll do is I'll leave the electricity for a moment and answer one or two of the questions that have come in over the last, I think about the last month or so. There's a few that has not been properly answered. We have Giant Turner, who says, fabulous info, thank you, saved me a lot of fuss and bother trying to figure it out. Well, Giant Turner, that's no problem. He was having difficulty fitting his sort of slider bracket to his shower rail, and one of our other videos showed how to do that and the easiest way to go about it. Simon Breeze, let me see. Thanks for the clear video, most helpful, and the shower's now working beautifully, except the shower is dripping. What do I need to do to stop the drip? Well, I checked this up, Simon, and it looks like you were looking at a Myra 8 or 88 service, one of the videos that we have showing you how to service it. If it's still dripping, really two or three things. The smallest washers that go, the smallest O-rings that go in the end of the shower valve, that if they get nicked or are not in perfectly straight, then that's what can cause it to drip. So you've got to make sure, strip it out, have a really good close at the smallest O-rings, which are on the end of the pistons. That may be the problem. These 8 and 88 valves are really old now, and the other thing to look at is if the O-rings are okay, have a really good close inspection of the brass, because the brass actually inside the valve can start to de-zincify. The zinc comes out of the brass and the brass becomes a bit rough. So to be honest, they're pretty good quality valves, so it really shouldn't happen, but it has happened in the past in some cases when you see the valve starting to slowly wear and disintegrate. We've got Kiki1. Hi, whenever I replace the outlet pipe on a T80 Easy Fit shower, it always leaks. After, despite putting the O-ring back in, could you please tell me what I'm doing wrong? I'm a plumber. Well, I'll tell you, it can be difficult, and it just happens that I've got an outlet pipe here. It doesn't matter because they're all much the same. I've got to admit that's happened to me before. You keep pushing the outlet pipe back in and there's often a drip. The things that are likely to happen is the old O-ring is still in there, and when you push it back in, the O-ring is twisting and it's not sitting exactly in place. The things that I've found in the past that make to make this easier is there's no good answer, but in some cases it's useful to put the O-ring on the spigot and then push the thing in, and in other cases it's sometimes better to put actually the O-ring into the bottom of the shower, make sure it's sitting properly, and then push the outlet pipe back in. there should be no other reason for it leaking there, but it's really just a case of making sure that it goes in absolutely square and that the O-ring's sitting properly. So if it doesn't work by putting the O-ring on the spigot, then try putting the O-ring in the socket and see if that works. It certainly worked for me in the past, and I've certainly come across that problem. I'll read some of these other questions for the moment and go back to the shower. So we need to talk about the electricity and how the electricity works as it comes through an electric shower. It's there should be an isolating switch, a pull cord switch or an isolating switch outside the bathroom, and it's connected to the shower. The kind of standard shower is 8.5 kilowatts. The showers range from 7, 7.5, 8, 8.5, 9, and so on, all the way up to about 10.5 kilowatts. Once you get above 8.5 though, that you often need to put in 10mm cable, and 10mm cable can be a real devil to put in. It's quite hard to work with, it's quite tough, and so in 8.5 you can usually get away quite easily with 6mm cable. You really need to check all the regs to make sure that you've got the cables not under insulation and that kind of thing. That's another subject entirely, and much more for an electrician than somebody that just fixes showers. So the power comes in here into the connector block, and the first thing that happens is it goes in from the connector block into the TCO, the thermal cutout. We've got a spare one here, this kind of thing here, and we also have a separate video on the TCOs, how to check them and how to make it work, how to make sure that they're working properly. So the power comes into the thermal cutout and out the other side. If the shower has overheated, the power will not get past the thermal cutout and therefore it won't heat up. But assuming everything's okay, the power comes in one side of the thermal cutout and out the other. Then down to the switches. And when you turn the shower on, what happens is that the solenoid opens up, it sends power to the solenoid opens up and water starts to run through the solenoid. Almost immediately this affects the pressure switch, and the pressure switch, if there's enough pressure, will activate the switch and allow the power to get past these switches. If there's not enough pressure, then what will happen is the power won't get through to the heating in the tank. It comes through to the switches will then turn on and allow the power then through to the elements. And as I showed you before, try and have a separate thermal cutout on the outlet pipe. Most thermal cutouts are two-stage, and as I say, I'm not going to go into that because we've got an entirely separate video. But what Triton's one very cleverly does, and some of the better showers, is it switches off one of the elements. So if it starts to get too hot, what this does is it switches off one of the elements. So the shower won't go absolutely completely cold, but the power will reduce, and all of a sudden you'll find that it's much better. You know, the temperature will drop, so you don't get scalded, and then come back on again as soon as the temperature starts to fall. So it's a really nifty little bit of kit, this, and it's I think, yes, it is. It's unique to Triton. So there we go. That is basically the water explained as it goes through the shower, and really the power explained. Very briefly, I have to say, but that's how it works. So what I'll do is I've got a couple of questions here, and I'll probably move over to them and see if we can answer them. So Tom said, what are the symptoms of a bad flow or stabiliser valve? Well, probably uneven temperature, so the shower will click on and off and on and off. It's the first thing to look for if the shower's going hot and cold is to make sure that you actually have the valve to the shower open properly and the valve coming into your house open properly, so it's getting the full pressure. And if they're open properly and the temperature's still varying, then there's a fair to middling chance that you've got a faulty stabiliser valve. You've got a faulty stabiliser valve that's causing the problem. That would be the first place to look. But first of all, check you're actually getting a decent amount of if you're getting a decent amount of pressure to the shower. Alright, and I see that Lucas is in the background here with a link to the videos showing you how all of this works. Thanks for the question. It's Lucas thanking Tom for the question. So, yeah, Tom, I hope that's helped to explain. It's not always the answer. I think sometimes it's difficult because we answer a lot of questions on our emails and that kind of thing, and where you do the best you can. There's nothing quite like standing in front of the shower or being in the premises to work out what the problem really is. And thinking about problems, we got I noticed that we had a query from Ellen Rudy, Ellen Rudy. So it's quite a long one, but I'll read it out. I hope you can help me. I recently had to replace an old electric shower and decided to use the expensive one we had installed in our garage annex. We installed there years ago, as we never use it. Problem: the newly installed shower now works in fits and starts. I'll try and explain. If I turn it on at medium and use it at low heat, it works fine. If I increase the heat setting to fast or turn it to a higher setting, the lights blink on and off and the water comes out in fast pulses. At the same time, the house lights dip and the shower loses power. So the house lights start flashing. When I turn the medium setting, and let it run for about 15 minutes, I can gradually get it hotter, get the shower hotter. The plumber has told me it's an electrical problem, and yet when the electrician came, he said the shower was at fault and I should buy a new shower. Well, to be honest, Ellen, that is just typical. Because what always happened is the plumber would like to blame the electrician, and the electrician blames the plumber. Having read this, my first reaction was that it probably is an electrical fault, because the shower going on and off should not cause the house lights to flash. So perhaps my first thought would definitely also be the same as your plumber: get the electric checked. The other things that can cause this is a pressure problem, as I explained earlier, maybe not enough pressure coming to the shower, and if the pressure is rising and falling, this can cause it to switch on and off, and therefore the lights dip. Another question I need to ask you is: was the shower that was in the garage the same rating, the same power rating as the shower you changed it with? If it's a different rating, you may have a problem then with the pressure or with the electricity. The one thing that you didn't tell me was what make of shower you had that was changed. I've got a funny feeling that it may just be a Myra Advance. A Myra Advance, I'm going to probably come to that later if we've got time. The Myra Advance has a variable solenoid in it, and if it's not being used, it's very likely that this solenoid's sticking. So you could replace the solenoid if it is an Advance, but to be honest, if it's not been used for that long, then I kind of tend to agree with the electrician. If you can't solve the problem quickly, it may be just a case of putting another shower in. Showers, like electric showers and ordinary mixer showers, they need to be used. If you don't use them, they're kind of self-cleaning, self-lubricating, and the water going through does it. If you don't use them regularly, then that can cause the problem. Often, what may help actually is just switching your shower on and off. Do it 20 or 30 times. Try and get it to the bits to free off. But it may be a case of putting a new shower in. Now, let me see, nothing else coming in on the live chat at the moment. So we'll go on to Red Zebra. Hi, I'm on my third Triton T80. It's a 10.5 kilowatt shower. It's been in 6 months and has gone. Wait a minute. It's 10.5. Been in 6 months and gone the way of the second with a thermal cutout sensor breaking and the shower going cold from then on. Why? Is there a design fault with the shower or a fitting error? It wasn't suffering particularly from low pressure. And I didn't cover the shower head with my hand to cause back pressure. Any suggestions? Well, it is kind of a difficult one, that. If the thermal cutout is cutting out, it tends to mean that the shower's been overheating, because the thermal cutout will work. I'd mentioned this in the thermal cutout video, that the thermal cutout will work once or twice. It will work quite a number of times, but it'll eventually break down if it's getting used too often. So my thought is that there must be the shower must be overheating, the thermal cutout's cutting in, and then the shower comes back to working properly again, and this is happening on and off all the time, and what you're effectively doing is wearing the thermal cutout out. That would be my first thought, and that would be a pressure problem that would cause that, because a 10.5 shower, that needs the full pressure. There's no way you can get away with any less. So same as before, check that the valve coming into the house is open, check that the valve in the line to the shower is fully open, and if that's the case, make sure that you're getting the full pressure. That there's no way you can tell the pressure without a pressure gauge. Or the other thing you can do is phone up your local water authority, and they should be able to tell you, give you an indication of what the pressure should be in your area. It is possible too that the water authorities working on the mains, they've got a burst pipe, they've turned the pressure down for some reason. But there's no design fault that I know of with the TCO, and it's certainly an unusual complaint. And so I'm just having a look again, see if we can think of anything else. Yeah, no, really pressure, or because the TCO is working overtime by cutting in and out all the time. There must be something that's causing that. And now we have Monica GB. My screw has rusted. My screw has rusted, and I sprayed it with WD-40, but it's not budging. Might give the top when I go. And thanks for the great video. I check what Monica was looking at. Monica was looking at our video that shows how to replace the rail or the shower rail and brackets. And on that video, we say specifically, it might be a bit more awkward, but to use this, go for the top screw and the rail and bracket assembly. If you go for the bottom one, it's often rusted, or it gets gunged up with the water or soap getting into it. So go for the top screw. It's generally in perfect condition, and although you may have to put something in to stand on to get a bit of height, it's generally much easier to unscrew it from the top, and makes the whole thing easier. Yeah, we've got somebody here, Cyclone. Yeah, being a smart guy, but well, Si, just you stick with it. If that's the best you can do. And finally, we've got Isolate Dibby Catastock. Fabulous. I spent so long trying to work out how to remove my slider rail, and then found your answer here. Well, basically that's just the same as the previous one. Taking the sliding bracket or the rail off the wall. That it makes it easier if you start at the top. And I think probably what I'll look at now is we've got a little bit of time, so I've brought a slightly more complicated electric shower along, and just to show you how that works and how the parts are much the same. So what we've got here is a Myra Advance that I mentioned actually earlier. That this looks a huge amount more complicated than this, but in fact all of the parts are much the same. That we've got the water coming in here, and it goes through the solenoid. Now this solenoid is slightly different. Instead of just being an on-off solenoid, it's variable, so that the solenoid itself can judge the amount of water that's going into the shower. Immediately below the solenoid, we've got a meter that actually works out the amount of water that's going through the shower, and a sensor that senses the water temperature as it comes into the shower. And so what we've got here, this is the outlet pipe, so the water comes in at the bottom, and as you can see, it comes up through this and comes out at the top. And at the very top here is a thermistor, and this thermistor works out the temperature of the water going out of the shower. So when you set the temperature, these two thermistors and the flow, the thing that judges the flow rate thing, that adjusts the flow through the shower, they're constantly monitoring it. So if the temperature starts to rise here a little bit, then what this does is it'll allow a little bit more water into the shower to allow it to keep it at the same temperature. So it's very, very accurately judging the temperature all the time, and it's a true thermostatic electric shower. And the circuit board here is, well, it looks terribly complicated, but these are relays, and basically all they do is they turn the power on and off to the elements that are in here, which is much the same as the standard switches on an ordinary shower. So where it looks much more complicated, and is a little bit, but it has basically the same components, relays which are switches, and the heating tank and the elements that are at the top, and a solenoid valve. The only difference is the solenoid valve's adjustable, and these two components here keep it adjusted all the time, which give you a really accurate showering temperature. There's a couple of showers that are working on much the same principle, but the Myra Advance seems to be the one that is kind of the market leader, I think. Anyway, that's how an Advance works. So here we go, we've got another one from, just a moment to put this over to the side, another one from Tom O'Connor. What is the most reliable make-of shower and what extra features do they have? Whew, Tom, that's almost impossible to answer. There's not so much a more reliable make-of shower, but as I said right at the very beginning, you kind of get what you pay for. So the more money you spend on a shower, the higher the quality. I mean, I know you can get them for 40 odd quid from B&Q when they're on offer. And if you pop one of these in fairness, it'll last a year or maybe a couple of years. But if you're wanting a decent quality shower, I think you really got to start at the bottom end, paying £100, £150. For me, that's where I would start, at the bottom end of the shower, to get something that's a decent quality. Okay, so you might get one of these showers at a bit of discount. So there's not a manufacturer that's better than others, but there is all the different showers and the different features that are in them, and the better the quality of the controls. So I'm just trying to think. I also think it's horses for courses. What I would say is put in the most powerful shower you can. If you're putting a new shower in, I would go for it as long as you can get 10 mil wiring in. The usual, as I say, the usual wiring for 8.5, you maybe get away with 9 on a 6 mil cable, but for the heavier duty ones, if you're going for it from new, then I think it probably is worth putting a 10 mil cable in and getting the extra performance. That performance becomes much more noticeable in the winter time. Perhaps I can actually explain a little bit about that, is that if you have an 8.5 kilowatt shower, it really doesn't matter who makes it. It's 8.5 kilowatts, and they will all produce exactly the same amount of heat. So if you want to go up a little bit, 9.5, then it will produce, all of the manufacturers, 9.5 kilowatts will be the same amount of heat. The way that we measure how effective a shower is that what you've got to do is you've got to get the temperature of the incoming water, and you measure the rise in temperature. So most people shower around 40 degrees. So what you really need to do is, if for example the water's coming in at 15 degrees, you need a 25 degree temperature rise. And you then have to work out what the flow rate for your 25 degree temperature rise is. Now with more kilowatts, you'll get more flow going through the shower and get your 25 degree temperature rise. And that's one of the questions we often get, that the shower's not working so well in the winter time. And the reason the shower's not working so well in the winter time is because the water's coming in much cooler. Say 5 degrees is often the temperature coming in, so the shower's got to work an awful lot harder to heat up the water, and the way it does that is by reducing the flow. That's all of the questions that we've had in so far. Tom, thank you for these questions. I hope you'll have found this valuable. I hope you will subscribe to our channel. We're on Facebook and Twitter. You can see us there. We have many instructional videos that go into a good bit more detail than I've managed to do with that. And we now need to think about what we're going to do for our next live stream. I've led through most of the kind of ordinary things. Perhaps anybody that's watching this can suggest to us what you would like to see in a live stream, because well, if it's anything to do with showers, hopefully we can help you. So thank you very much for watching, and check us out in our next live stream. Thank you.